She looked at him for exactly 7 seconds before standing up, picking up her designer purse, and walking away without saying goodbye. Around her, the elegant restaurant continued humming beneath warm amber lights, crystal glasses chiming softly against polished tables. But something about that silent exit lingered in the air long after the front door closed behind her. Charlotte Bennett had built a billion-dollar technology empire by trusting first impressions. She believed confidence could be measured in tailored suits, expensive watches, and polished introductions. So when she saw Marcus Hayes waiting at the table in a neatly pressed but inexpensive blue shirt, wearing worn leather boots and checking his phone for a photo of his 8-year-old daughter, she quietly concluded the evening had already failed. She never noticed the kindness in his eyes. She never asked why his smile seemed untouched by disappointment. She certainly never imagined that the quiet black single father sitting alone across from the untouched candle had chosen that modest restaurant because his daughter once told him the chocolate pie there was the best in the city. Marcus looked toward the entrance for another moment before gently folding the cloth napkin and placing it beside his untouched glass of water. He did not sigh. He did not chase after Charlotte. He simply thanked the waiter for the coffee that had never been poured and stood to leave with the same calm dignity he had carried into the restaurant. The young waiter hesitated before quietly apologizing for what had happened. Marcus answered with a warm smile. Everyone has the right to make a decision. Sometimes we just don't have all the facts. The words stayed with the waiter long after Marcus disappeared through the revolving doors. Outside, the cool evening breeze drifted between rows of carefully parked cars as the city lights reflected across rain-polished pavement. Marcus paused for only a second, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets while reading a text message from Ava asking if he would still make pancakes tomorrow morning. His smile grew instantly. Nothing mattered more than keeping promises to his little girl. At almost that exact moment, engines began humming from the far side of the parking lot. One after another, exotic supercars rolled silently beneath the restaurant lights. Employees hurried outside. Valets exchanged confused glances. Diners stood near the windows with curious expressions as the breathtaking collection of machines came to a perfect stop. No one knew why they had arrived. No one realized every driver was waiting for the same quiet man Charlotte Bennett had dismissed less than 3 minutes earlier. The line of supercars remained perfectly still until Marcus gave a small wave that almost no one noticed. Instantly, every driver stepped out, not with excitement or applause, but with quiet respect. One by one, they handed over keys, folders, and schedules before returning to their vehicles without a single unnecessary word. Marcus accepted each item with the same calm expression he had worn inside the restaurant. To anyone watching through the glass, it looked less like a celebration and more like the end of an ordinary workday. 5 minutes later, the entire collection disappeared into the downtown traffic, leaving only Marcus climbing into the same weathered pickup truck he had arrived in. The contrast was so strange that even the restaurant valet stood frozen for a moment before shaking his head, convinced he had imagined the whole thing. By 6:30 the next morning, Marcus was already awake. The smell of fresh pancakes drifted through his small kitchen while sunlight slipped across worn hardwood floors. Ava hurried downstairs wearing mismatched socks and a backpack almost as big as she was. She wrapped her arms around her father without saying a word. Marcus laughed softly and placed another pancake onto her plate shaped like a smiling bear. "You kept your promise?" Ava whispered with a grin. "I always will," Marcus replied. They bowed their heads for a brief prayer before breakfast, thankful for another ordinary day together. Nothing inside the cozy little house suggested extraordinary wealth. The furniture was comfortable but simple. Family photographs filled the walls instead of expensive artwork. Crayons, school projects, and library. Books occupied more space than decorations. After dropping Ava at elementary school, Marcus drove toward the outskirts of the city, where an old brick warehouse stood between two aging factories. The faded sign above the entrance simply read Hayes Automotive Restoration. Delivery trucks came and went throughout the morning while mechanics worked carefully on classic engines that had been forgotten by time. Visitors assumed Marcus owned a modest restoration shop, and he never corrected them. He spent the first hour helping a young technician solve a transmission problem on a 1967 Corvette before quietly sweeping the floor himself. Every employee greeted him by his first name. Every conversation felt relaxed. No one treated him like a billionaire because inside those walls he refused to be one. Shortly before noon, an elderly customer struggled to pay for an unexpected repair bill. Marcus glanced at the invoice, smiled, and quietly crossed out the remaining balance with a pen. "Your grandson needs this truck more than I need the money," he said. The old man's eyes filled with grateful tears, but Marcus simply wished him a safe drive home and returned to tightening bolts beneath another classic car. Across the street, a black luxury sedan slowed almost to a stop before continuing forward. Inside sat Charlotte Bennett on her way to an executive meeting. She barely noticed the weathered garage with its faded paint and ordinary appearance. She certainly did not notice the discreet security cameras, the private entrance hidden behind the warehouse, or the underground collection that housed some of the rarest automobiles in America. She drove away believing the man she had dismissed the night before had already disappeared from her life. She could not have been more mistaken. Charlotte Bennett had forgotten about the quiet mechanic before lunch, but the city had not. At the annual Horizon Mobility Summit, where executives, investors, and automotive innovators gathered beneath towering glass ceilings, conversations flowed as smoothly as the string quartet performing near the grand staircase. Charlotte arrived precisely on schedule, surrounded by assistants, reviewing presentations and acquisition proposals. Her company was preparing to announce an ambitious partnership that industry analysts believed would redefine luxury transportation. She welcomed the attention. Success had taught her that confidence often arrived before certainty. As she stepped onto the exhibition floor, something unexpected caught her eye. A crowd had formed around one particular display, yet no new vehicle sat beneath the bright lights. Instead, people appeared to be waiting for someone. Whispered conversations drifted through the hall. Cameras were quietly repositioned. Security personnel adjusted their earpieces with unusual discipline. Charlotte glanced toward one of the event organizers. "Who is everyone waiting for?" she asked. The woman smiled politely. "A private collector. He rarely appears in public. We are honored he accepted the invitation." Charlotte nodded without much interest. Wealthy collectors loved attention. She had met dozens of them. They usually enjoyed making dramatic entrances surrounded by expensive machines and louder personalities. Then the entrance doors opened. No music played. No announcer spoke. A familiar weathered pickup truck rolled slowly onto the exhibition floor, drawing puzzled expressions from nearly everyone watching. The old vehicle stopped near the display platform, and Marcus Hayes stepped out carrying nothing more than a simple leather folder. He wore the same humble boots Charlotte remembered from the restaurant. His blue work shirt had been replaced by a clean charcoal jacket, but nothing about him suggested spectacle. For one suspended moment, the entire hall remained silent. Then the chairman of the summit walked forward with both hands extended. "Mr. Hayes, welcome back," he said warmly. Behind him, museum curators, automotive historians, manufacturers, and collectors followed one after another, each greeting Marcus with genuine respect rather than rehearsed formality. Charlotte stood perfectly still. Her assistant frowned in confusion. "Do you know him?" Charlotte answered without taking her eyes off the gathering. "I thought I did." Marcus exchanged quiet smiles, remembered names, and asked about families instead of business. There was no arrogance in the way he carried himself, only the relaxed confidence of someone who no longer needed recognition to measure his worth. Moments later, the large curtain covering the center platform slowly lifted. Beneath it rested a breathtaking collection of handcrafted concept models representing decades of automotive innovation. A presenter stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, every vehicle you see here comes from the Hayes Heritage Collection, regarded by many as the finest privately owned automotive collection in the United States. Preserved over 2 decades under the leadership of Mr. Marcus Hayes." A wave of astonished murmurs swept across the ballroom. Charlotte felt her heartbeat slow rather than race. Her mind returned to the restaurant, to the untouched glass of water, to the folded napkin, to the man she had judged before learning a single true thing about him. For the first time in many years, she wondered whether the greatest mistake of her career had not happened inside a boardroom, but across a dinner table she had abandoned too quickly. Charlotte remained where she was long after the applause faded. Around her, executives eagerly surrounded Marcus with invitations, partnership proposals, and requests for photographs. Yet he accepted each conversation with remarkable patience before quietly excusing himself whenever someone tried to praise him too much. There was something almost unfamiliar about a man who seemed completely comfortable stepping away from admiration instead of chasing it. Who exactly is he? Charlotte finally asked one of the senior museum trustees standing nearby. The older gentleman smiled as though he had been waiting years for someone to ask that question. Most people think Marcus Hayes collects rare automobiles, he replied. The truth is he rescues history before it disappears. Half the vehicles in this exhibition would have been melted down for scrap if he had not quietly purchased them years ago. Charlotte looked back toward Marcus, who was kneeling beside a restored 1957 Chevrolet, smiling as two elementary school students listened with complete fascination while he explained how families once crossed America in cars like that one. He spoke to them with the same warmth he had shown the restaurant waiter. There was no performance in his voice, no attempt to impress anyone. The trustee continued. Every spring he opens his private collection to public schools without charging a single dollar. Children from neighborhoods that have never visited a museum get to experience American automotive history because of him. Charlotte blinked. None of the business magazines had ever mentioned that. She quietly opened her phone and searched his name. To her surprise, very little appeared. No interviews. No luxury magazine covers. No social media empire filled with expensive photographs. Instead, she found articles about scholarship programs for vocational students, donations to technical colleges, grants for veteran mechanics, and anonymous funding that had saved several small transportation museums from closing their doors forever. Even the largest donations had remained private until nonprofit organizations insisted on acknowledging them years later. He hates publicity, the trustee added. He says generosity should never become advertising. Charlotte lowered her phone. Those words landed more heavily than she expected. Her own company invested millions every year promoting charitable campaigns. Marcus seemed to practice them in silence. Across the exhibition hall, Marcus received another congratulatory handshake before politely checking the time. Please excuse me, he said with an apologetic smile. I promised my daughter I would be at her school before 3 o'clock. Several executives laughed softly, assuming he was joking. He was not. Within moments he had left the summit exactly as quietly as he had arrived, climbing back into the same aging pickup truck while assistants from billion-dollar corporations watched in disbelief. Charlotte found herself staring through the glass entrance as the old truck disappeared into afternoon traffic. One of her vice presidents approached with a thick folder. The board is waiting. We need your approval on the acquisition. Charlotte accepted the folder without opening it. For the first time in years, quarterly reports seemed strangely unimportant. Her thoughts returned instead to a little girl she had never met, waiting somewhere for a father who valued keeping one simple promise above every compliment the business world could offer. As the meeting began upstairs, Charlotte heard only fragments of financial projections. Deep inside, another conversation had already started, one she could not silence with numbers, titles, or success. It was the quiet realization that true wealth had never been parked outside the restaurant. It had been sitting across the table from her all along. The following Saturday arrived with clear blue skies and a gentle autumn breeze that carried the scent of fresh leaves through the city. Charlotte found herself driving somewhere she had never imagined she would visit. She had canceled 2 investor meetings, postponed a television interview, and ignored a dozen messages from her board of directors. Instead, she followed directions that led her back to the quiet brick warehouse with the faded Hayes automotive restoration sign. There were no luxury cars parked outside, only family sedans, pickup trucks, and an old-school bus waiting near the entrance. Curious voices and children's laughter drifted through the open garage doors. Charlotte stepped inside slowly and stopped almost immediately. The workshop she remembered from the street looked completely different from within. Long workbenches had been transformed into learning stations where volunteer mechanics patiently showed children how engines worked. Teenagers wearing safety glasses carefully polished chrome under the guidance of retired craftsmen. Parents watched proudly from folding chairs while fresh lemonade and homemade cookies sat on a simple refreshment table near the back wall. There were no admission tickets, no corporate banners, and no photographers documenting the event. It was simply a community gathering built around curiosity, learning, and kindness. Marcus stood near the center of the garage helping a little boy tighten the final bolt on a restored bicycle. "You did the hard part," Marcus said with an encouraging smile. "Now, remember, confidence comes after practice, never before it." The boy grinned from ear to ear as his mother quietly wiped away tears of gratitude. Charlotte remained unnoticed beside a row of classic trucks, watching Marcus move from family to family. He remembered children's names. He asked about report cards. He congratulated one teenager for earning a scholarship and encouraged another not to give up after failing a certification exam. Every conversation carried the same steady warmth. There was no difference between how he spoke to strangers, employees, or successful business owners who occasionally stopped by to volunteer. After nearly an hour, Ava ran across the garage carrying a small cardboard box decorated with colorful markers. "Daddy," she called happily, "we collected enough today." Marcus knelt beside her. "Enough for what?" Ava carefully opened the box. Inside were handwritten thank you cards and small donations from neighborhood families. "For Mrs. Wilson's wheelchair ramp," she answered proudly. Marcus smiled with quiet pride. "Then tomorrow we start building." Charlotte felt something tighten gently inside her chest. She had spent years believing leadership meant inspiring thousands through speeches and innovation. Yet this father was quietly changing lives one promise at a time without asking anyone to notice. As she turned to leave, hoping not to interrupt the peaceful afternoon, Marcus looked up and recognized her immediately. Their eyes met across the workshop. He did not appear surprised. He did not appear resentful. He simply offered the same calm smile he had given every person who walked through those doors that day. Charlotte hesitated before walking toward him, suddenly realizing that asking for a second chance required far more courage than earning another business victory ever had. Marcus walked toward Charlotte with unhurried steps, wiping his hands on a clean shop towel before offering a courteous nod. "Good afternoon," he said gently. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no trace of wounded pride, only the quiet composure that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Charlotte opened her mouth, then closed it again. For someone who negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation, finding the right words suddenly felt impossible. "I owe you an apology," she finally managed. "A real one." Marcus listened without interrupting. The sounds of children laughing, tools clicking softly against workbenches, and parents chatting nearby filled the brief silence between them. "I judged you before I knew anything about you," Charlotte continued. "I saw your clothes, your truck, and the fact that you were raising your daughter alone. I believed I already knew your story." Marcus looked toward Ava, who was happily painting wooden birdhouses with several younger children. A small smile crossed his face before he answered. "Most people do." Charlotte lowered her eyes. "I was wrong." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he replied with surprising honesty. "You were." The words were not spoken to embarrass her. They were simply true. Charlotte accepted them without defense. After a quiet moment, Marcus continued. "The strange thing is, I do not remember being hurt because you left. I remember wondering what kind of pressure makes someone decide another person's value in less than a minute." Charlotte looked at him, surprised. "You were thinking about me?" Marcus smiled softly. "People usually carry reasons before they carry opinions." Those words settled deeply inside her. For years she had believed quick judgment was the mark of an effective leader. Now she wondered how many remarkable people she had quietly overlooked because they did not fit the picture she expected. Ava suddenly ran over holding 2 paper cups of fresh lemonade. "Daddy, I made extra," she said cheerfully before noticing Charlotte. Hello. Marcus introduced them with simple kindness. Ava, this is Miss Charlotte. Ava offered one of the cups without hesitation. Would you like some? It is a little sweet because I accidentally added too much sugar. Charlotte accepted it with a grateful smile. Thank you. Ava giggled. Daddy says sweet mistakes are easier to fix than mean ones because kind people forgive. Charlotte glanced toward Marcus, who looked almost embarrassed by his daughter's honesty. She listens more carefully than I realize, he admitted. Ava skipped back toward the workshop, leaving the two adults standing quietly once again. Charlotte held the paper cup with both hands. Would you allow me another dinner? She asked. Not because of the cars. Not because of the collection. I honestly wish I had never learned about any of that. I would rather know the man who spends his Saturdays teaching children how to build bicycles. Marcus remained silent for several seconds. Considering her request with the same care, he seemed to give every important decision. Finally, he answered with a gentle smile. Dinner is easy, he said. Trust is slower. If we meet again, we begin as two people, not as a chief executive officer and not as the owner of anything. Just Marcus and Charlotte. For the first time since leaving that restaurant days earlier, Charlotte felt something inside her become unexpectedly lighter. She nodded. I think that is exactly where I should have started. A week later, Marcus and Charlotte met again. Not in an elegant restaurant, but at a neighborhood park where Ava's elementary school was hosting its annual family science fair. Folding tables stretched across the grassy field beneath colorful banners, while children proudly displayed handmade bridges, model rockets, and tiny solar-powered inventions. Parents wandered from booth to booth carrying cups of hot coffee, as the crisp afternoon air filled with cheerful conversations and occasional bursts of laughter. Charlotte arrived wearing simple jeans and a light sweater instead of a tailored business suit. Felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comfortable. She carried no assistant, no security team, and no schedule except the one promise she had made to herself, to listen more than she spoke. Marcus greeted her with the same relaxed smile as before. You found us, he said. Charlotte nodded. I almost asked my driver to bring me. Then I remembered we agreed to leave titles behind. Marcus laughed quietly. That sounds like progress. Before she could answer, Ava hurried over holding a small wooden car she had built herself. Miss Charlotte, look, Daddy helped me make it, but only after I tried 3 times by myself. Charlotte admired the tiny vehicle with genuine delight. It is beautiful. Ava grinned. Daddy says beautiful things usually have mistakes hidden inside them. Charlotte smiled. Your father says a lot of wise things. Ava shrugged as though it were completely ordinary. He just talks like that at breakfast. A whistle echoed across the field as the principal announced the judging would begin. Several children suddenly realized one display table had partially collapsed after one of its legs loosened in the soft ground. A young boy looked ready to cry as his carefully assembled model city leaned dangerously to one side. Without hesitation, Marcus walked over, knelt beside the table, and quietly tightened the loose support using a small screwdriver from his pocket. There, he said warmly. Sometimes strong foundations just need a little adjustment. The boy smiled with relief. Charlotte noticed something remarkable. Marcus never looked around to see whether anyone had noticed his kindness. Helping seemed as natural to him as breathing. Later that afternoon, while Ava proudly explained her science project to the judges, Charlotte sat beside Marcus on a wooden bench beneath an old maple tree whose golden leaves drifted gently around them. For several peaceful minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Charlotte broke the silence. I spent years believing success meant being the smartest person in every room. Marcus watched Ava laughing with her classmates before answering. And now, Charlotte took a slow breath. Now I think success might be leaving every room a little kinder than you found it. Marcus looked at her with quiet respect. That lesson costs some people a lifetime. Just then Ava came running back holding a small blue ribbon. Daddy, I won second place. Marcus knelt to her height with a proud smile that made the ribbon seem more valuable than any trophy. I knew you could do it. Ava hugged him tightly before turning toward Charlotte. Daddy says second chances are sometimes better than first chances because you appreciate them more. Charlotte felt her eyes grow warm. She realized the little girl was no longer talking only about science fairs. Without realizing it, Ava had given words to the hope Charlotte had quietly carried ever since she walked away from that first dinner. Several weeks later, Charlotte stood behind the podium at her company's annual leadership gala, an event attended by investors, community leaders, journalists, and hundreds of employees. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, and enormous screens displayed milestones, financial achievements, and ambitious plans for the future. Every year, the audience expected another polished presentation about innovation and growth. Instead, Charlotte quietly folded the prepared speech that her communications team had written and placed it beside the microphone. A gentle murmur spread across the room. Even her board members exchanged uncertain glances. She looked across the audience until her eyes found Marcus seated near the back beside Ava. They had accepted the invitation only after Charlotte insisted they come simply as friends. Marcus wore the same quiet smile he always carried, while Ava waved enthusiastically before settling back into her chair. Charlotte took a slow breath. "Tonight," she began, "I was supposed to speak about leadership, strategy, and success. But none of those subjects matter if we fail the first lesson of character." The ballroom grew still. "Not long ago, I met someone and decided I understood his entire life before I had listened to a single sentence he had to say. I judged his clothes. I judged his truck. I judged the fact that he was raising his daughter alone. I believed appearance could tell me everything worth knowing." A silence settled over the room so complete that even the sound of silverware stopped. Charlotte continued with calm honesty. "I was wrong." No excuses followed. No attempt to soften the confession. The greatest failure was not that I misjudged one remarkable man. The greatest failure was believing that success had given me permission to judge anyone so quickly. Many employees slowly lowered their eyes. Others glanced toward Marcus, who remained exactly as he always was, quiet, humble, and completely uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. Charlotte smiled gently in his direction. The man I underestimated taught children without cameras watching. He preserved history without asking for recognition. He helped strangers without expecting gratitude. Most importantly, he showed his daughter every single day that character is something you practice when no one is applauding. Several people quietly began to clap, but Charlotte gently raised one hand. "Please do not applaud yet. Listen first." The room immediately became silent again. "Today our company is creating a new leadership program. Every executive, including me, will spend time serving in community projects before leading another management seminar. We will learn names before titles, stories before assumptions, and people before profits." This time the applause rose naturally, not because of the announcement, but because the words carried unmistakable sincerity. Marcus did not stand. He did not acknowledge the attention. Instead, he leaned toward Ava and whispered something that made her smile. As the audience rose to their feet, Charlotte stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward the back of the ballroom. She stopped in front of Marcus, extending her hand with quiet gratitude. Marcus accepted the handshake with the same gentle dignity he had shown from the very beginning. Around them hundreds of people applauded, yet neither of them seemed to hear it. In that quiet moment, respect had finally replaced assumption, and no amount of wealth could have created a richer ending to the lesson they had shared. Spring arrived quietly, painting the city with fresh green leaves and longer evenings that seemed to invite people to slow down. On one peaceful Saturday morning, Marcus drove his familiar old pickup toward the neighborhood farmers market with Ava sitting beside him, happily humming a song she had learned at school. Charlotte was already waiting near a small bakery, holding 3 warm cinnamon rolls instead of a business phone. She smiled the moment she saw the old truck pull into its usual parking space. Marcus stepped out first, then opened the passenger door for Ava, who ran forward with the excitement only a child could carry. "Miss Charlotte," she laughed, wrapping her in a cheerful hug. "You remembered my favorite." Charlotte handed her the cinnamon roll with a smile. Some things are worth remembering. They spent the morning wandering through local vendors, listening to a street musician playing gentle jazz, tasting homemade jams, and laughing over handmade birdhouses that Ava insisted every squirrel secretly wanted. No reporters followed them. No investors interrupted them. There were no cameras waiting to capture carefully staged moments. It was wonderfully ordinary. As the afternoon sun settled lower across the park, the three of them found an empty bench overlooking a small pond where ducks drifted peacefully across the water. Ava leaned against her father while quietly finishing the last bite of her pastry before eventually falling asleep on his shoulder. Charlotte watched the gentle scene without saying anything for several moments. Finally, she looked toward Marcus. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "The night we first met, why did you never tell me who you were?" Marcus glanced at the sleeping little girl resting comfortably beside him. "Because I hoped someone might want to know who I am before discovering what I own." Charlotte lowered her eyes, letting the answer settle into the silence between them. After a moment, she smiled gently. "I am grateful you gave me the chance to learn the difference." Marcus returned the smile, peaceful and sincere. People can change when they choose humility over pride. The breeze carried a handful of blossoms across the pond as children laughed somewhere beyond the trees. Expensive cars continued passing on the distant road, unnoticed by any of them. Marcus still drove the same weathered pickup. His remarkable collection remained tucked safely out of sight, admired only by those who truly appreciated history rather than status. Nothing important about his life had changed except that he had welcomed one more person into the quiet circle built around kindness, trust, and second chances. Sometimes the richest person in the world is not the one surrounded by the most valuable possessions. Sometimes it is the one whose character remains priceless even when no one knows their name. And perhaps that is the kind of wealth that never fades, because respect earned through humility will always outlast admiration earned through appearances.